it's not just for this Purim, but it's for all Purims. Purim deals a lot with God's deliverance of his people Israel from anti-Semitism. And the book of Esther is a unique book in many ways. It deals with the Jews who were in Persia after the Persians overtook the Babylonians. And there was a Jewish community there that had not returned to Israel. Among them was, of course, Queen Esther, whose pagan name was Hadassah, and her uncle Mordecai, who had become her adopted father. The rabbis, interestingly, point out that she's one of the few, very few, female types of the Messiah. And they make some capital of the fact that she had no father or mother, which is very interesting in connection with Yeshua, Jesus. We know a fair amount of Esther in terms of the book itself, but there's also an apocryphal Esther. And there is a considerable amount of knowledge of the historical background of Esther, which some liberal scholars have tried to amplify out of proportion to try to discredit the historicity of the book. Nonetheless, the book is still in the canon of God's word. The villain is, of course, Haman. Haman had a plan to destroy the Jewish people. Haman was an Agagite. In other words, a descendant of Amalek. He was not himself a Persian, but he rose to position in Persia. Now, this is very important in understanding modern Iran. The religion of Iran, of ancient Persia, was Zoroastrianism. It was not a particularly anti-Semitic religion at all. And in fact, Zoroaster had teachings that were somewhat compatible with the Sons of Light, Sons of Dark teachings of the Quran community with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Later, of course, it evolved into fire veneration and things of this nature and took on pagan characteristics and all sorts of things. They don't bury the dead. They dismember the corpses and leave it on an edge of a cliff for vultures to take the body members away to heaven and all kinds of crazy things. But originally, it was not quite the same as it has evolved. The calendar and the holidays of Iran to this day remain Zoroastrian, not just Islamic. It's had quite an influence. But what was important about the villain Haman, who became prime minister under King Ahasuerus, was that he was a descendant of Amalek. Now, when we remember the story of King Saul was deposed as king at the decree of the prophet Samuel because he failed to disperse of Amalek. What's this bleating of the sheep that I hear? He tried to look for something good or tried to sort out the good things from something that God said was bad. An example of this today would be people who were saved out of false religions, like Roman Catholicism or something like that, and still look to find good things in the Roman Catholic Church or the Roman Catholic system. Well, anything good there is only to masquerade what's bad. Now, this is not to say they're not Roman Catholic people who are sincere, but it is to say the Roman Catholic belief system is false, even though it may contain elements of truth. As just one example. Never look for something good in the camp of Amalek. God says, what's this bleating of the sheep? But they were the ancient enemies of the Hebrews, and they come back to haunt the Hebrews centuries later after King Saul fails to get rid of him. Now, King Saul was, of course, from the tribe of Benjamin, So he was a Benjamite who failed to get rid of, as it were, Abimelech. He failed to get rid of him. To understand this, we have to look at the book of Genesis, Jacob's prophecy to the tribes, and Genesis chapter 49. And we read the prophecy there about the tribe of Benjamin, the prophecy to the tribe of Benjamin. Remember, other people were from the tribe of Benjamin, including Esther and Mordecai, and including Rabbi Shaul of Tarsus, known as Paul the Apostle. In verse 27 of Genesis chapter 49, we read, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey. In the evening he divides the spoil. In the evening he divides the spoil. now divide the booty with the strong. He becomes a partaker of God's blessing, of God's treasure at the end, but he begins badly. The characteristic of the tribe of Benjamin is to begin badly but end good. To begin badly but end good. We see this played out throughout the scriptures, certainly in the book of Judges, the final war in Judges. But we see it in the story of Esther and Mordecai. While it was a Benjamite, Saul, who failed to get rid of the Agagite, it was Esther and Mordecai from the tribe of Benjamin who did get rid of him, that is Haman. Benjamin always begins badly, but ends well. Well, the New Testament shows us something that the early Christians held to. They believed that because St. Paul was from the tribe of Benjamin, this also applied. He began as a persecutor of the church, a ravenous wolf, but he began one way and ended quite another, ended on a positive note. Now, this is very important in understanding the background of the story of Esther. In the story of Esther, Mordecai did a good service to the Persian king. It was recorded but forgotten, and in the meantime comes this anti-Semite Haman. Now, in Jewish culture, Haman is a figure who personifies the arch anti-Semites of every generation. For instance, the medieval popes who conducted anti-Semitic pogroms, or the Inquisitors, or Adolf Hitler, each of those was the Haman for their generation. Each generation has a Haman. Well, the Haman, going back now to the early 1990s, was Saddam Hussein. He pledged to destroy and obliterate Israel and take that land and give it to the Muslims. Haman in the book of Esther was defeated on the 14th of Adar, the feast of Purim, the feast of Purim. What day of the year did Saddam Hussein, after firing the Scud missiles at Tel Aviv and Haifa, surrender to the Americans and British? The 14th of Adar. He surrendered on the feast of Purim, the very day. An anti-Semitic madman on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, determined to destroy the Jews, and was utterly defeated on the 14th of Adar. Same day of the year, same location, same ethos. Let no one tell you that contemporary events in the Middle East do not fulfill prophecy. If it's a city with walls like Jerusalem, it's actually celebrated on the 15th of Adar, or the city, not only of Jerusalem, but any walled city in Israel. Akko being another. But the 14th is the basic day. It roughly is, it will be tomorrow, Thursday, the 1st of March, this particular year of 2018, is when it's celebrated. Jewish children, at least Ashkenazi Jewish children particularly, put on a play called a Purim in Yiddish, and they have a festal pastry called Chomentashen, or Oznaim Haman in Hebrew, but Chomentashen in Yiddish, which means Haman's ears. It's like a Fig Newton kind of a pastry, shaped like ears of an elf or an imp or something. And Jewish children get dressed up in costumes, and they also put on the costumes of the characters, and they perform the Book of Esther. And the pretty little girl gets to play Queen Esther, and the mother girl gets to play Queen Vashti. Esther replaced Vashti when Vashti displeased the king. And on the council of his advisors, the king, Ahasuerus, had a beauty contest. And the winner of this beauty contest, of course, would be the queen in place of Vashti. Now, there's much typology in Esther, the relationship between Israel and the church, the two women. Not that the church replaces Israel, but obviously Vashti displeased the king. Esther did not. We then also have the scepter being held out on pain of death if it wasn't held out before you could come before his throne. No one comes unless the Father draws him. This kind of imagery. The celestial imagery of the eternal throne in the book of Revelation, looked at in the original Greek, draws on the Septuagint version, particularly language imagery of the ancient Persian court in the book of Esther, chapter 1. Much similarity. Hence, Esther is also of literary importance in understanding the New Testament, particularly in the Greek language. Again, I would refer you to our teaching tape on the book of Esther. I refer you to our teaching tape on the book of Esther, the season of myrrh and the season of spice. Nonetheless, let's just look at Esther. Esther deals with liberation from anti-Semitism, when God would raise up a hero, Mordecai, and a heroine. Another important aspect of the book of Esther is that when God uses a woman and places her in a position for God to use her mightily, her head is always, as it were, covered. Every Esther has a Mordecai. Every Deborah has a Barak. God does not circumvent his order of spiritual authority. These people who run around with the Jezebel spirit in the church, with women preaching to men and things of this nature, that is unscriptural. We're teaching doctrine to men or women pastors, and some people like to say crazy things on the internet, zipping the mouth of the sisters and silencing the sisters. No one says that women can't share. No one says that women can't teach other women. But leadership is male, and women should not, in an ideal situation, teach doctrine to men. It's just not biblical. And when you see women who are intent on doing it, they are to some degree controlled by a Jezebel spirit. It's not of God, and it will ultimately bring God's judgment. Certainly deprive of God's blessing at some point. When there's a Esther, there's always going to be a Mordecai. Same with Junes in the New Testament. There'll always be a male covering. Nonetheless, let's look further now. Anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism. It's always the same thing. Remember, anti-Semitism and persecution of the true church are heads and tails. We can distinguish between heads and tails, but we cannot separate them. It all goes back to Genesis chapter 3. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. It will bruise you in the heel. He's going to bruise you in the head. You'll bruise him in the heel. Satan has always tried to destroy Israel and the Jews to prevent the coming of the Messiah. That was what was on back of Haman. That was what was on back of Pharaoh. That was what was on back of Abimelech. That was what was on back of all of them. To prevent the return of Jesus, it's the same. The Jews had to be regathered to Jerusalem, or have to be, in order to accommodate the return of Christ prophetically, according to the teaching of Jesus directly, in Zechariah 12, in Matthew 23, in Luke 21, 24, etc. Again, there are those in error who deny this, but they're in error. People who are basically were not very good Bible teachers to begin with, like the late John Stott being one of them. A man, in my opinion, just not worth paying any attention to. Nonetheless, he believed that. He teamed up with Stephen Sizer against Israel and so forth. Those who deny the prophetic purposes of God for Israel. The same as the first coming of the Lord depended on God's prophetic purposes for Israel and the Jews. The return of Christ depends on God's prophetic purpose for Israel and the Jews, just as much as it depends on God's purposes for the church. That's why Satan is trying to destroy Israel. It's why we see the increases in anti-Semitism. It's why we have the Holocaust. It's why you see the UN and people, corrupt politicians like Barack Obama trying to equip Iran to destroy Israel, as he did. What's in back of this? Well, it's a satanic spirit. It's a satanic spirit, Satan trying to prevent the return of Jesus. That's what controls Stephen Sizer. It's what controls the Christ at the Checkpoint movement, the Sabille movement. It's what's on back of Barack Obama and people like this. But it's also what drives modern Iran, Persia, once again. Now again, modern Persia is like ancient Persia. The religion of ancient Persia was not Islam. It was Zoroastrianism. They took the religion, ironically, of their Arab enemies. So too, Persia, Iran, Persia, took the religion of the Arabs. Their religion was not Islam. It was not Shia Islam. It was Zoroastrian. Be that as it may, let's move ahead. Anti-Semitism always says the same things, and always has. The Jews control this, the Jews control that, the Jews have an agenda, there's a secret plan, conspiracy theory things. The Jews this, the Jews that. Well, let's understand certain things. The Jews control the medical profession. The Jews control the legal profession. The Jews control banking. If a Jew had a farm in Central or Eastern Europe for centuries, his barn would have been burned, his house would have been burned, and his land confiscated in a pogrom. Jews were forced into earning a living as tradesmen, merchant traders, and other things. Medicine was looked down on as an ugly profession. It was bloodletters done by barbers. It was considered to be, quote unquote, sorry to offend our British friends, a bloody, bloody way to earn a living. So who do you get to perform such bloody services? Get a bloody Jew. Jews were forced into medicine. They were forced into it. Usury, money lending. Who did the nobility of Europe use to do it? It's a dirty business. Get a dirty Jew. They were forced into these things. Forced into them. But coupled with the emphasis that the Torah placed on education, literacy, numeracy among the Jews above other nations, above the Gentile nations, Jews did well in these things and turned them into professions. But it was nothing they chose. It were things they were forced into. Nonetheless, we still hear the same lies to this very, very day. The Jewish control of Hollywood. A half-truth. The founder of Hollywood was Cecil B. DeMille. He was not Jewish. Yes, the Warner Brothers were Jewish, and Harry Cohn was Jewish, but they didn't make pornography or pornographic movies. The film stars who were Jewish largely came from radio and vaudeville, not from burlesque. Others came from burlesque. Jews basically were comedy actors, and they came from vaudeville or radio. We're speaking of Eddie Cantor, the Marx Brothers, or the Three Stooges. They were clean. They were not vulgar or pornographic. The people who made their movies, such as Harry Cohn, did not make smut movies. Hollywood's biggest producer today is George Lucas. Not a Jew. Oh, the Jews are the liberals, money and back of Hollywood. Wait a minute. Jerry Weintraub was a conservative Republican Jew, big filmmaker, Ocean's 11, etc. His son is a Jewish believer in Jesus. Jerry Bruckheimer, another big Hollywood filmmaker, conservative Republican, right, center. Nobody denies that there are Jewish liberals in Hollywood like Harvey Weinstein and these people, but nobody denies that there are non-Jews who are the same. Hollywood has never been exclusively controlled by Jews. Never. Sony Pictures is owned by the Japanese. It's all half-truth. The people who pushed the envelope, so to speak, with pornography coming into mainstream film, they came from burlesque, not from radio or vaudeville. Again, they would not be particularly considered pornographic by modern standards, but people who pushed the envelope in the early days of Hollywood, Mae West, W.C. Fields, these people were not Jewish. It was not Jews who did that. Then we hear, oh, the Jewish pornographers. Yeah, you've got small-time Jewish porn merchants. Sternberg, this other guy, Jeremy, or the San Fernando Valley. Or you had Al Goldstein with his filthy magazine in New York. These were small-time. The porn king of Soho in London was Raymond. He was a Catholic. The people who brought pornography mainstream, Hugh Hefner, Playboy Enterprises, not a Jew. Bob Guccione, Italian-American, Penthouse, not a Jew. Larry Flynn, not a Jew. Hustler Magazine. Jews were never the big players in pornography. Oh, there were Jews in it at a lower level. But it was never a Jewish enterprise or a Jewish domain. Never. Oh, the Jews controlled banking. What? Oh, there are Jewish bankers, but most of them are situated and have been situated in Europe, like the Rothschild family and so forth. There are banking dynasties, and some in the States, Kuhn Loeb and so forth. They'll always point out Goldman Sachs. Okay. Now let's look at the whole story. Who was the chairman of Chase Manhattan? David Rockefeller, a non-Jew. Who was the chairman of Citicorp? Donald Rist, a non-Jew. Who was America's first and biggest banking dynasty? The Mellon family, non-Jews. Who was America's biggest banking robber baron and a political and financial dynasty on top of it? J.P. Morgan, a non-Jew. Investment bankers, Brown Brothers Harriman, non-Jews. If you want to say there are Jews involved in international banking and investment banking, of course there are. But again, to say the Jews control it? The present new chairman of the Federal Reserve, and I don't like the Federal Reserve, but the current chairman is a non-Jew. Paul Volcker, one of the most influential chairmen of the Fed, a non-Jew. Yes, you had Jews like Alan Greenspan and so forth, but to say it's controlled by Jews? It just doesn't work that way. That's just not financial reality. It's not political reality. Oh, the Jews control the newspapers and the media. If that was the case, why is CNN so biased against Israel? Why is the BBC so biased against Israel? Why is UKI TV so against Israel? Why are the networks so biased? Yeah, you've got Jews in it like David Zucker. Those people disgust me. But Rupert Murdoch and his family are not Jewish. He's a Scottish Presbyterian from Australia. Fox News, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, not Jewish. USA Today, America's biggest chain of newspapers, Gannett's, not Jewish. America's first newspaper dynasty, the Hearst family from Citizen Kane. William Randolph Hearst, New York and San Francisco, not Jewish. America's biggest tabloid, the New York Daily News, Patton family, Irish Catholic, not Jewish. Nobody denies there's Jews in the media, but to say they control it? It's not true of the media, not true of Hollywood, it's not true of banking, it's certainly not true of pornography. It's just not true. Now look, at any time in history, it is a fact, it's an undeniable fact of history, that one ethnic group, as it were, tended to predominate. This is for sure. One ethnic group did tend to predominate. During the Renaissance, it was Italians. Almost everybody who did anything was an Italian. Michelangelo, Machiavelli, Dante, Leonardo da Vinci, they were all Italian. Other times in history, the ancient world, time before Jesus, they were all Greek. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Archimedes, Hippocrates, Herodotus, Euclid, they're all Greek. During the Age of Empire, everybody was British. They were either English or Scottish or Irish. You know, oh, the Jews control this, the Jews control that. My family is a mixture of Jewish and Irish. Why do the Irish have a disproportionately large amount of their population of Nobel laureates for literature? Why are so many of the great literary geniuses Irish? Take your pick. Both Catholic Irish and Protestant Irish. James Joyce, Samuel Beckett, Oscar Wilde, whatever. Oh, you go to the major police departments and county and prosecutors' offices and district attorney's offices in the USA. Boston, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, dominated by Irish. Always have been. Oh, the Irish control the police and they control the courts. No, they don't. The Jews control the elections. Wait a minute. Organized political corruption in the United States. Don't get me wrong, my mother's family is Irish now. The political machines. The Kennedy machine in Boston. The Cook County machine, the Daley machine in Chicago. Tammany Hall in New York. The Hague J.V. Kennedy machine in North Jersey. These are all Irish. But you can't blame the Irish people for organized political corruption. It's like blaming organized crime on the Italians. Yeah, this is a Costa Nostra. Bulger was Irish in Boston. The Westies in New York are Irish. Mickey Shaughnessy, Irish, Chicago. The first organized crime in America, the Molly Maguire Jr. racketeers were Irish. Then there were Jewish gangsters. Meyer Lansky, Legs Diamond, Bugsy Siegel. What are you going to blame just the Italians for? You got Chinese triads. You got Russian mafia. You got to go for the Jews. Jews. Well, at any time, somebody has stood out. Be it the British, be it the Greeks, be it the Italians. One time it was the Dutch. Everybody was from Holland. No question. In the 20th into the 21st century, the Jews are having their day and their hour. Disproportionately, a large amount of people in most fields, from science to the arts, finance, are Jewish. Disproportionately large amount. But that's not unique to the Jews. Everybody's had a turn. Now, I would say it's of some prophetic significance that the Jews are having their turn at this time in history, when Israel's reborn as a nation and prophecy is being fulfilled, yes. But to say this is Jewish control, that's like saying there was an Italian conspiracy for the Renaissance. Well, if there was an Italian conspiracy for the Renaissance, for the most part, the world benefited from it. Despite the corruption of the Vatican and the papacy, for the most part, Western Europe benefited from it. And not just with the Renaissance. What would have happened if Hitler had gotten the atomic bomb before the Americans? Robert Teller, Robert Oppenheimer. These are Jewish scientists. Most of those physicists and nuclear engineers were Jewish. Up to the 1950s, polio was a marauding disease in the United States. And in much of the developed world, it was a marauding disease. What do you want to do? Curse the Jews for Jonas Salk? For poliomycin? For the vaccination? America would have lost its economic dominance in industry had it not been for high tech. Labor-intensive industries, manufacturing, these things were going increasingly to Asia, or if they were labor-intensive, to the third world. What has kept America on top? Microsoft, Apple, Facebook. Now look, I don't like a lot of what goes on in Silicon Valley and Seattle. I really do not. I don't like the policies of Mark Zuckerberg. I do not. But to say high tech is controlled by Jews, yeah, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, they're Jewish. Mark Zuckerberg is Jewish. Stephen Job was not. Bill Gates is not. Jeff Bezos is not. It's not a Jewish enterprise. It just isn't. None of these things are. Are Jews in them? Absolutely. And have made good contributions to most of those things. But this ignorance and bigotry is just stupid. It's just not like that. Likewise, the Jewish liberal establishment. You hear this all the time. The ACLU is headed by Anthony Romero, an Italian Catholic American. He's not Jewish. Now, the alternative to the ACLU, the conservative, Judeo-Christian opposition to the ACLU, is the ACLJ, the American Center of Law and Justice. That is headed by a Jew. My old friend Jay Sekulow, the constitutional attorney, former lawyer for Jews for Jesus. Oh, the Jews leading to pornography and the homosexuality. Give me a break. Lewis Sheldon, the activist who opposed it in San Francisco, a Jewish believer in Jesus. Jewish liberals, I don't like the neocons. They're establishment Republicans. But most of them, Paul Wolfowitz, Bill Kristol, they're mostly Jewish. John Bolton, Jewish. I do like him, actually. Oh, the Jewish journalists are left-wing. What about David Horowitz? Turn on the radio. Listen to conservative radio. Mark Levine, a Jew. Michael Savage, a Jew. Dennis Prager, a Jew. Oh, the Jews are left-wing. Yeah, what about Barry Goldwater? A Jew. What about the economist Milton Friedman? A Jew. He gave Margaret Thatcher her economic policies that pulled Britain back from the abyss that the Labour Party got it into. An American Jew. Rutgers University in New Jersey. Nobel laureate. Where did he get these lies, these half-truths? It's a combination of lies and half-truths. If you're going to knock Jews, remember, Jesus Christ, not only was he a Jew, he is a Jew. And he's coming back as king of the Jews. And every one of these anti-Semites will give account to a Jewish king of kings who wept over Jerusalem. Who Romans 11 says, still the people of God, because of God's covenant and promise to their fathers. So it's Purim. God gave victory over an anti-Semite from Persia. And now as Iran tries to eradicate Israel once again, God will again give victory. He's the same God. He brought down a Haman in 1991, Saddam Hussein. And he'll bring down the Iranian Khamenei and Nasrallah and Barack Obama if need be. He's a great God. And he's the God of Israel. You want God to bless you. You bless Israel. The best way you can bless Israel is to pray for their salvation and to tell the Jew the gospel of their own Messiah, the Lord Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus. My name is Jacob Prasch. Thank you so much for listening. To our Jewish friends, Hag Purim Sameach. Happy Purim. God bless.